It's not about what you have. It's about who you have. It's not about where you live. It's about how you live. And it's not about what you do. It's about why you do it. Welcome to the Momenticize podcast. Today, I've got a guest on here. He's been one of the biggest mentors outside of my father. He's been one of the biggest mentors in my life. He's a phenomenal investor. He's a phenomenal father. And he's built a team that's been leading real estate agency group for the last 10 years. Without further ado, please help me welcome Brian Ladd to the podcast.
Hey, I'm psyched to be here. Thanks, Dirk.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on. For everybody who doesn't know Brian Ladd, give us just a quick origin story, where you came from, and we'll go from there.
Well, I'm a Virgo. I like to play in the outdoors. No, born and bred into real estate. I grew up in a home building family in Colorado, and love playing in the outdoors. I love real estate, and I took a variation on the trajectory of our family and changed from home building to representing sales when we moved to Bend, Oregon here in about 2010, 2011. And we've built a really beautiful high culture team of sales agents, a real small team here, and have had a lot of fun and success with that here locally. And a lot of it has to do with working with your amazing family on this project here where we stand, Tethero, which is an incredible project here in West Bend that your family saw through the tough times, and it's become one of the shining stars of Oregon.
Yeah, it was quite the journey there. I know that when you came in and met with my father, you've been a huge part of taking the vision, selling it, and bringing it to life. It's been quite the journey that actually now is on the back end of it. So
yeah, we're kind of in the swan song right now. Tonight I'm going to present at the Homeowners Association. I'm looking at the map, and when we got involved, there was, I think, maybe 6 or 7 houses out of the 600 home sites. Mm-hmm. And it had been on hold through the whole Great Recession. And we started turning that in 2010, 11. We got a few builders involved to put up some spec homes to prove that the project was coming back, in conjunction with your father, your mother, and their investor, Willem. Put money behind the golf course, kept it going. And then we just kind of collectively got the ball rolling again back then. And I've been humbled to be part of the rebirth and bringing it to where it is now. And now we're kind of shutting the doors on the development aspect. And basically it's the homeowners project now. And that one's been a lot of fun. It's definitely probably the most memorable era of my work career. And it allowed me to build the team that I have that has, branched outside of that quite a bit. But it was always at the core of who we are as the Ladd Group.
Yeah. Yeah. You've done a phenomenal job there. You said at the beginning just now that you came from a real estate family. What made you, and you shifted from the building side, the development side to really the sales side? You still invest, you still build, you still do it all. But what made you do that shift? What was the reasoning and what did you see there?
Well, I love housing. I love, and not from a speculative investment side. I think it's great for that as well. But I think at the very core of it, what housing represents is the foundation for people's lives and how they experience, it's the physical it's the physical representation of their home base and in who they are with their values, their families, and how they interact with the world, and the security that it provides to raise children and have a spouse and become involved in your community. So to be involved in that, I think it's a sacred space. I think there's a lot of people that don't give enough heart to housing and simply see it as an investment vehicle. And I'm really afraid of these giant organizations like BlackRock that are owning tens of thousands of houses across the US with with indifference to, the viability of the communities of the people that are living there. But I'm very proud to be part of housing. My grandfather started building homes after World War II. My father built with him for a few decades. And then I built with my father for a bit when I was in Colorado prior to coming here. And I love construction. I love seeing beautiful houses and beautiful planned communities go up. But when I came here, I looked around and said, what is the part that really lights me up the most? And I would study marketing in college. I love marketing and I love sales. And so we put together a brokerage team out here and I still invest in real estate. And I believe it's a great vehicle. But we built a really fun sales team out here.
Yeah. I mean, to say the least, it's an amazing sales team. One of the things that I think one of the challenges that people have in the real estate game in general is that realtors, quite frankly, don't know what they're doing because I don't think they've really touched bases on it. And one of the things I love about you and your group is because one, you're passionate about it, but two, you have so much depth and real knowledge on how to build it, invest in it, and how to really structure it. What do you think about that, and how do you attribute that to? I mean, it's got to be one of the big reasons why you guys have become the number one group in Oregon for so long.
Well, yeah, I appreciate that. It really comes from just dedication to the craft and the profession. I look at it as not just a career, but a passion, and we want to be the absolute experts in the market, and that takes a lot of hard work. And so when we look at housing, we don't look at countertops, and we're not selling countertops and kitchens. What we are selling is investment vehicles, homes, that serve as that foundation of life, like what I was talking about. And when you understand what it takes to, you start pulling it back, not only build a house, but to build a community, and understand what the really, the underlying currents to upholding values are of master plan communities and how towns are growing. And when you can be involved and understand trajectories of town and trajectories of industries, you can help guide clients in a more comprehensive way rather than showing them what's in the MLS. And it's always been hard to work in an industry where there's such a low barrier to entry and anyone can become a realtor, in less than a month. And there's been a lot of low value agents out there giving the industry a bad reputation. And granted, rightly so. There's a lot of people that underserve, that do it as a hobby. And I think they poorly represent clients, and I think they add little value, if any value, to the process. And I think that with some of the changes that we're having with the National Association of Realtors, things like that, I think are for the benefit of everybody, because it's going to be harder and harder to be a casual agent in the market. Because honestly, the level that we're working at is I want to be seen around, sitting in the same room as someone's certified financial planner, their CPA, their doctor, their lawyer, that suite of professional services around them that are helping them build their life. And that's how we want to operate. And we do it very strategically on my team. What we are not is random agents that do a little bit of everything. We've been laser focused on representing specific areas, specific communities, and then we all have specific roles within the team, because real estate sales has become more complicated than ever. Now you're a marketing firm, you're an advertising firm, your transaction coordination, your legal, you're all these other things. And when agents try to be everything at once and to try to understand what's trending on social media and how to do lead capture and Google Pay PPC and all these other things, on top of being an expert in the market and understanding the zoning and the regulations around new projects, it's hard to do everything well. And so what we've done is a very clear distinction of a SEAL team size team, where we all have our roles and we just work in symphony.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely have a SEAL size team, because if you look at just purely the numbers, there's teams, you guys sell well over 150 million worth of real estate, or even 200 million worth of real estate. And then you look at the compared groups, they have that's with 9 people. And you look at the compared groups, they have 150 agents under them, and they're still not tracking that. So you definitely built a SEAL team.
Yeah. We have a lot of fun, and it's high production per agent. My agent on average does about 25 times the average volume of an agent in the market. And that comes from laser focused efficiencies and a team with such high level of protocols and organization that we can do it at that level.
What's the culture like in that SEAL team that you got there?
Well, I would love to. I'd like to think that it's perfect. Nothing's ever perfect, but it's really good. And when we started building the team over the years, there's a lot of tactics and advice you get from real estate coaches, whatnot, and it's all about numbers and splits and things like that to try to retain teams and try to recruit agents. I've never recruited an agent; they've always come to me. Yeah. And what we've always led with is culture. Yeah. And because I'm absolutely about abundance, and I've been working in this industry now for 2.5 decades, and I'm to the point where it's, to me, more about meaning and giving back and how I can use my knowledge in the community to help better the community. And then also, how do I use our position and relevancy in the market to help build the careers of those that are around me that help me build the LAD group? And so right now, it's all about, I'm involved in the LAD group to help my agents on the team build the life they want as well. And so I don't stand between, there's not a scarcity mindset on clients or volume or commissions or any of that. And the LAD group is really there to serve as the runway for all the agents on my team. And when they know that I would do anything in my power to help them build their career, they just need to meet me at the line of scrimmage, and we'll run it together. And so I believe that culture lies at the core of a team, because there's a lot of tactics and ways that people try to do teams, but without culture, it's nothing. And I believe that people leave teams and businesses for the same reason they join them. So if they join a team to make a little extra money, as soon as they make that money, they'll leave. Or if they join it for specific tools, when those tools aren't there, they leave, or whatever. But when they come for culture, they're only going to leave when that culture goes away. So I think it's inherently a better model of business to build a team around culture rather than any specific attribute of business.
Yeah, for someone who's listening, I couldn't agree more. But for someone who's listening, they're like, great, I agree. We need to build culture. What are some of the ways to build culture?
Well, so the culture becomes, that was a big mind shift to me when I started taking my eye off day-to-day sales and operations and saying, hey, I want to continue to build this team. And it's not a build a team in numbers. I know a lot of people that I've watched over the last 15 years, they're all about growth and agent count, transaction count, whatever. And I watch them, and they're on these treadmills, and it's all about numbers, and there's nothing underpinning it. And people are getting washed out, and they have 100% turnover of their team. And every year the team picture looks different. And you're like, that's not a real team. That's just a group of people that are trying to collectively work together to make some commission.
Yeah.
I think it really starts with authentically aligning with people that resonate with you, and they're doing it for the right reasons. And so we don't do personality tests of trying to get people that are good at cold calling or specific sales skills. We're trying to get people that have high ethos, high values, that love the industry, and that want to work and succeed in it and be a part of the community. And once those people approach the team, we build an individualized plan around that person, because there's a million different ways you can be successful in real estate. And we build it, whether it's their involvement in specific, nonprofits or specific parts of the market or specific areas, people coming into town, people going out of town. There's a million different ways to be successful in this industry. And we can individualize a plan for just about any personality type. And so I go all in on my team, and the culture and the trust is built over time. We're not, we don't play the silly things of the Friday gifts and the bowling and all that. We're trying to approach this from an authentic allegiance and an alliance on who we want to be.
Yeah, you've done a great job of that, Brian. I mean, when you look at everything today, to me, you're one of the most successful men I know, both in investing, family, and your business. Take us back to the beginning of that, though. Take us back to like Brian at 22 years old.
Yeah.
What was that like? And then talk to us about that journey and what it took to become as successful as you are today.
Yeah. So started with mentorship. I grew up in home building, and I don't want anyone to mistake the fact that I'm saying, hey, I'm a fourth generation real estate, that I walked into this big successful career and it was laid out in front of me. And I was able to watch the iterations and the ups and downs of 4 generations of my family being highly successful and then kicked in the teeth in this industry, and watch my grandfather go from building thousands of homes and advising Lyndon Johnson on housing policy for the U.S. to losing it all in over a couple of recessions in the U.S. that hit housing particularly hard in the 80s. And so, but what I did get from that is I got some steadfast mentorship and values that allowed me to understand how this is done. This is black and white. This is right and wrong. And then it was built upon fundamentals of, the simple fundamentals that you and I have had conversations on. When you're a builder, the business has to work. You have to understand your break-even points. You have to know your variable costs and your fixed costs, and you have to understand the ratios of what you can afford to pay for land and what you can afford to pay in variable costs to build the house, and what are the margins that you're going to need to be able to sustain, and what are and all the systems involved. And I was a student of that. And when I first started in the industry and I worked in that, I didn't give it enough appreciation. And when I went out in the world, I realized how crazy it was, how poorly run building companies were and sales companies were. So I was mentored to do it the right way, and to make sure that it was built on a solid foundation, not on a house of cards, which a lot of investments and builders and sales organizations are in this industry. But what I was very clear about from a very early age is that I was going to work hard early. And, and when I came out of college, I was in my young 20s, I really wanted to start getting ahead. And I, wanted to build my first house and wanted to, start investing. And over time, I at that point, I didn't really understand the future value, net present value of the investments that I was making and how those would compound over decades. And now I am approaching age 50. I look back and I'm like, thank goodness I was doing that, because while it felt small at the time, the compound effects of who I was becoming as a person professionally and those investments that I was laying down, whether it was a couple $100s a month or building that first house for $200 and some $1,000, those didn't seem like those were going to be life-changing activities. But those compounded over a few decades start to get to the point where now here I am looking back and I'm like, I had an extra decade of investing and working hard when there was a lot of people that were lost in that decade.
Yeah. Let's dive into that exactly that point on the future value of a present investment. We were at one of our first ever event. You were there.
Yeah.
And there was an amazing story that you told. I'm actually just going to let you tell it, but it's all about the present value, the future value of your present investments are. And just, can you break that down for us and help people understand what a small investment today can grow into?
Yeah. So I'm going to pull up my my present or my compound calculator. I think it's an app called Compound. Because what I did is I picked on somebody in the audience, and I wasn't picking on him because what I asked is who has a $25,000 watch on. But before I asked who has a $25,000 watch on, I said, who's wearing $1 million watch? And of course, then it was crickets. No one in the room would raise their hand. And I said, somebody does. I said, who raise your hand if you have a $25,000 watch? And sure enough, there was a guy with a Daytona Rolex or whatnot. And I kind of picked on him, and it wasn't because I don't want him to have a watch that he's proud of, that he's going to pass down to his grandson one day. I think that's wonderful. But what I wanted to show is the accessibility of investing for the future, because there's a lot of people that says, I'll never have 1 million or 5 million or $10 million when I'm done with investing. It's simply a hurdle I can't get over, and they kind of give up. And so they don't take those baby steps in investing, whether it's in ETFs in the equities market, or it's buying a house versus renting, or it's buying a rental property. They always feel that it's so intangible, and then the investments they're making right now won't ever compound to anything significantly. So what I did is I pulled up my calculator, and I did a net present value, and I said, okay, or a future value. And I said at $25,000 at a 10% annual return, which is the S&P 500 over 40 years with zero additional additions. Here, let me do it. I'm going to do it right now. It was the watch was worth $1.13 million after 40 years.
Yeah, the $25,000.
If he had not bought that watch, if he had put that $25,000 in the S&P 500 index and forgotten for 40 years, he already had $1 million. So when we start saying $25,000 in your 20s is over $1 million in your 60s, and you start learning how to do those couple $100 a month investments, or one rental home in your 20s, the compound effects over that of decades are absolutely life changing. And it's just hard for people to be able to see far enough into the future. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. I mean, and myself included, right? It's been sometimes when I set a goal. I remember when I first set a goal when I was still a W-2 employee. Yeah. And my goal was to be able to get to a 6-figure income. And that felt so far away. I was 24 years old writing it out. I'm like, how am I going to get to that? And it felt, I didn't know what steps I needed to take, but I wrote out like at 27, I want to have a $100,000 income, right? And even that step felt so big, so huge. And I just had to start trying to figure it out. And the way I did it was trying to sharpen skills, right? Talking to mentors, start sharpening the skills. And next thing you know, you get there and you're like, I should have asked for some more. I should have gone a little bit bigger on that, right? So I couldn't agree more on that component. Let's talk specifically, if you put $25,000 into the, in the S&P 500 and let it grow, that's one thing. But let's talk about if you put $25,000 into real estate and then the leveraging components that you could use in real estate as well, just the leverage part of real estate, the benefits, and why take $25,000 and invest it in real estate versus into the stock market.
Yeah. So real estate investing is not for everybody, but I think it can be an incredible part of one's portfolio. And, as an asterisk on this, what I would probably say is that if you could only buy one home in the next 5 years, stay in your rental and buy an investment property.
Yeah.
Because, there's a lot of different attributes and equations to run on rent versus buy on your personal resident and the benefits of that. And with the down payment invested elsewhere and flexibility to move for careers and whatnot. It's a much more complicated decision. I think long-term, your personal residence, really the kind of the nuts and bolts of, you can have about 50 different variables and there's all different types of discussions on this. But once you own a home for more than 5 or 7 years, generally owning a home is always a better investment than renting, which is just kind of lost spend. But when it comes to buying rental properties, it's an absolute whole different animal. And there's two primary parts to that. And it's not magic, but there's the tax benefit side of that. And we can talk about that. And then there's the positive leverage side of it, of getting a mortgage on that. And so I think without those two things, I would say if there was not tax benefits to owning real estate and there was not positive leverage, I would say put your money in a S&P 500 ETF fund and call it a day. But when I look at the ability to do that, and let's pick those apart maybe a little bit, I'm able to achieve IRRs, internal rate of returns, of anywhere from, or cash on cash returns, anywhere from 13 to 15 to 17%. When the S&P 500 equities market is 9 or 10%.
Yep.
And that's not every year, but over time that happens because let's go back to your example, $25,000, let's call that a 20% down payment. Or 25, that would be your down payment. Let's say there's a $250,000 house and you want a 20% down payment. Let's say that's a $50,000. But you have a $200,000 loan and everyone's going to say you're going to pay interest on that loan, but that's an expense that you get to, expense against your income. You also get to depreciate against your income. There's depreciation schedules on houses and bonus depreciation. I don't know how deep you want to go into that, but basically the cash flow that you're going to generate on that rental is basically tax-free because you're going to have enough expenses, property management, et cetera, to offset your income. So it's kind of a net zero. So even if you're only making a 5 or 6% cash flow, that really gets bumped up to like a 7 or 8% equivalent because you're not paying taxes on that income. Obviously, when you go to resell it, if you were to, you may have to recapture some of that. But you never sell,
exactly.
or you roll it in 1031. But that what you really will, the really multiplier over time is two things. One, forced savings in the sense that over a 10 or 20 or 30 year period when your tenants are paying your mortgage for you, money of that goes to buying down the principal. So that loan gets bought down over time. So there's kind of forced savings and returns there as well. But if a $500,000 house goes up to $600,000, that's a $100,000 return. But if your down payment was $50,000 and you made $100,000, it was a 300% return, because you're making it on your down payment only. So the multiplier effect you get of cash on your cash invested is a game changer because generally you're not buying on margin in stocks and things like that. And I wouldn't suggest buying on margin. And I would never suggest doing it with loans if you're looking at real estate in the flip mentality or you want to be involved for a year or 2 years or 3 years or whatever, because there are cycles that if you have too many loans out there and you get caught in a cash squeeze, you're in trouble. But when I look at real estate, I never want to sell it. I want to continue to provide good quality housing for tenants that can't afford to be homeowners. I think there's a real role to be a good, responsible local landowner in your community, the landlord in your community. And I think that should best be done with local owners rather than corporate, entities that are getting into some of these markets. But I think that there's it's a model I believe in.
Yeah. I mean, it's for me, when I look at it, it's real estate is the best way for a common person to grow wealth over a long period of time, right? You have to be smart, you have to make good moves, but because it has the positive leverage, because it has the appreciation benefits, and because as you hold it over time, just like if you put it in the real estate market, it would compound over time. That real estate's also going to compound. And what I really like about it is that first $25,000 or $50,000 that you put down, if it's a rental, you're going to have, not only are you going to have appreciation that in the future equity that you could probably tap into, but you also have the pay down, the amortization. So you're building equity over time. I mean, just in 5 years of holding that, you're going to have about 10% of additional equity just from a pay down of your debt, right?
Sure.
So that alone is a beautiful thing. And then, like you said, the other amazing thing about real estate is once you sell that stock, that you could put it in a Roth IRA, et cetera. But if you were to sell something, typically you'd have to pay tax on that. Yeah. Right. With real estate, what's so good about it, if you hold it for 10 years and you bought it for, like you said, $250,000, and you hold it for 10 years and now it's worth $500,000, you could do a refinance on that, which is a non-taxable event, pull more cash out and go and invest again.
Yeah. And I'm absolutely with you. And when you asked me before, you're like, when do you plan on selling? I say never. And and I say that a little facetiously. There are some cases for rolling properties, selling a few properties, rolling them into a bigger complex or something like that. But that's just through the 1031 exchange where it's a non-taxable event because you're moving from one investment to the next. You sell a property and go to equal or greater value in another property. But my new strategy is really, I've humbly stayed into kind of the townhome and single family lane rather than trying to go from 10 to 100 to 1,000 doors like a lot of people try to do. They're always trying to scale. I conservatively stay in that lane, but that's not for everyone. But I believe in it. It's a good, solid model that works for me.
Yeah, one of the things you always taught me from the beginning was, hey, if you have to hit a home run on this deal, if you have to hit a home run on this deal, it's probably not worth doing, right?
Yeah.
And so just focusing on good fundamentals, being very conservative, and if you just keep hitting singles and doubles throughout a lifetime, all of a sudden, like you said, you'll look back and that future value of what you're doing didn't feel like it was that big at that time. The future value, all of a sudden, there's this exponential moment where you'll be like, holy cow, I'm a multimillionaire now just from stacking a couple investments in the present.
Yeah. And when, to get to that, I think that it's interesting because real estate is inherently seen as risky. But I think you can, do it in a fairly conservative manner once you get your first couple properties. Yeah. And I think that threshold, that barrier to get into your first home is going to feel like a ton.
Yeah.
You're going to have to beg, scrape up, partner any way you can to get that first down payment. And then it becomes easier and easier because then you now have income from a rental property to help you qualify for a loan on the next one. That one's producing positive cash flow to create some additional savings to go to that next one. And like as hard as it is to buy that first rental property, the next one's about half as hard. And then the next one's about half as hard again. And then it gets more about, how much time do I want to dedicate to continue to buy, properties like that. Rather than, it doesn't feel so insurmountable. But I think people unnecessarily, to go back to what I was talking about, people unnecessarily stack too much risk. And I've seen a lot of people work hard for many years and they create this stack of real estate, super high leverage, go all in on a project. And when that collapses, it starts moving down the way and their equity gets wiped out across the board and it looks great on paper, all this massive leverage. But when it hits hard. And when I buy properties, I buy stable, boring 30-year debt.
Yeah.
That doesn't change. That payment's going to be the same exact payment year in and year out, decade in, decade out. The only variables are property taxes, things like that. But it's conservative and I have conservative ratios. My average debt per property is about 50% right now. Yeah. And I'm not always refinancing and trying to cash all that out because I'm trying to get in a situation that can weather downturns, weather recessions, weather times where vacancy rates go high. When I really caution people against is getting too addicted to short-term debt that's either cheaper or easier to access. There's a lot of commercial debt out there that's short-term, 5, 7, 10 years. And what happens is when those happen to become due, like we're here in 2024, there's a lot of commercial debt that's coming due with high vacancies and lower rent rates. And all of a sudden, there's going to be people that have these perfectly good investments in commercial buildings, but their loan payment is going to reset from 3 to 8% when they're already vacant. And they're going to walk away from millions of dollars of equity and hand these beautiful properties back to the bank. And it's completely unnecessary. It's just because they got shorter term debt and they were too leveraged.
Yeah, short-term vision is creating a real problem for them as well. Let's pivot a little bit and talk about market. Let's talk both macro, start with the macro side of the market, and then let's come close to Oregon, Central Oregon. But start first on the macro side of the market. What are you seeing? What do you believe? I mean, if you listen to any of the news, there's fear across it all. But what do you believe? What's happening on a macro level for us right now?
Yeah, so the macro, there's a lot to talk about. But I think people need to separate. They're always worried about the problem du jour, the president, the next election. And I've now been through, I don't know, 5 presidents worth of real estate investing. Yeah. I don't know, maybe not that many. And it's often very unrelated to what a lot of real estate investors are talking about. Yeah. What really it comes down to is supply and demand. Yeah. And historically, when there was less barriers to creating new housing, there was always available capital. There's always available land. There was very little laws in jurisdictions to create new subdivisions so that builders and developers could react very quickly and stamp out new subdivisions. Historically, housing would oversupply about every 7 to 10 years. Yep. There would be too much supply for the demand. Builders would freak out, they would drop prices. And then there would be about a 2 or 3 year slowdown. Then there would be another 7 to 10 years. It was just a run like that for 50 or 60 years. Things have changed over the last couple decades. It's much harder to develop. There's a lot more restrictions on how it should be done, I think, in a lot of good ways as well. But it's taken that oversupply equation out of it. And we're massively short on homes here in the U.S. And so
how many do you think? How many homes?
The stats you and I have talked about before, it's really anywhere from about 4.5 to 5.5 million homes in the U.S. And so what we're looking at right now is in the next 5 years, the millennials are going to have their peak buying years. I think the average age of a millennial right now is 29 years old, which is the biggest demographic boom that we've ever had. You know, when we look at all the waves of how many people there are by age group, millennials are the peak. There's more than the baby boomers, et cetera. And the next 5 years are their peak buying years. And we already have a housing shortage, macro and micro, like here in Bend. The housing planners, the whatnot that I talk with, if we wanted median price housing, we would need another couple thousand homes here in Bend. And I'm not saying that we should add a couple thousand homes, but we're short homes everywhere. Yeah. And we're about to go through 5 years of millennials needing to get houses to have their families. And then after the millennials, we've got Gen X. Yep. And Gen X. And what was interesting is I was going over some statistics yesterday for a webinar that I was doing. Gen Xers are actually buying homes at a faster rate earlier than the millennials ever did. Mm-hmm. And part of it has to do with job prospects and bigger economic cycles. But everyone said, oh, the millennials and the Gen X and everyone's going to be renters of the future. And there are some cases that the barrier to entry to buy houses is going to be tougher than ever. Yeah. Housing prices are expensive. Mortgage rates are high. Incomes have not grown as much as housing prices. But the younger generations are showing they want to be homeowners. So I think there's going to be continued demand on the supply that we have. And I'm not going to say it's always going to be hockey stick up and to the right, nor should it be. But when I look at housing over the next 5 to 10 years, I see more demand than there is supply, generally leading to price appreciation.
Yeah. So the fear mongering and the presidential election and all of that doesn't matter because you're breaking it down to simple supply demand. Yeah. And that's going to drive the opportunity. Yes.
And there's going to be cycles within that. Yeah. And there's going to be inflationary cycles. And then there's going to be the Fed changing monetary policy to try to slow down inflation. And they're purposely trying to drive us into a recession right now to slow down consumer spending. And then once that goes down, then they're going to drop interest rates and we'll actually see a housing boom. Housing usually booms during recessions. Yeah. I think 6 of the last 8 recessions, housing prices went up. And it has to do with usually because during a recession, people aren't spending money. So to encourage money spending, the Fed lowers interest rates, and lower interest rates lead to lower mortgage rates. So then how people start buying houses, which usually leads us out of the recession. So while consumer spending on phones and bubblegum and socks are low, housing starts coming back. So everyone thinks recession equals housing correction. It doesn't always. Yep. It did in 2008, but that was kind of a weird one.
Yep.
And so there's so many variables when people authoritatively speak on exactly what's going to happen in real estate. It's often related to like an 8th tier variable on housing. I'm like, well, that is part of it, but there's like 7 more things that are way more important to housing than what you're talking about. And it just takes, because it's a confusing industry and headlines don't inform. They terrify more than they clarify.
That is extremely, extremely true. And for me, when I look at that too, you look at the mainstream media, and I've said this before, but you look at the mainstream media and if they're fear mongering you, there's a reason for that, right? There's a narrative behind that. And you got to look past that and into like, what are the people who are extremely smart? What are they doing? Right. And what do they think about as well? The example I use is like, if you looked at media about housing, it's like housing is going to crash, or blah, 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 blah. And then you look at, for example, somebody like Warren Buffett, who then goes and invests he invested almost $1 billion in 3 national home builders. Yeah. Why did he do that? Exactly this, for the reason that you said, was because he sees he doesn't make it complicated. Yeah. He sees the simple supply demand issue. And so he's going to invest in companies who are going to help provide the supply where there's going to be a major, major demand. So, you got to get through all that fear mongering and noise and think whether or not you believe in that, what both Brian and I believe in and many smart people believe in, and then decide what you're going to do about it if you want to get into the game and how you're going to get in the game from there. So,
well, and you and I had talked about this before, and I didn't want to come off wrong, but you were saying, hey, what's going to happen to housing prices? And I said, I don't care. And it wasn't that I don't care what happens to housing prices. I deeply believe that we need affordable housing prices here in Bend and nationwide. I think that we need housing policy that supports median price housing for median wage earners. I think it's at the core of a healthy, happy, productive community. But when I look at it as an investor, everyone's always freaks out and they're like, I'm afraid to buy a rental house because property values might go down in the next year or two. When I look at it from a real estate perspective, it's like, well, I'm buying properties to provide rental housing for the next 30 years. It doesn't affect my equation, whatever happens to price. It's like buying Apple stock at 182. If it goes down to 165 tomorrow, but you don't plan on selling it for 5 years, what difference does it make? It's all based on what are the rental incomes and things like that. So I think people need to say, what variables actually affect me? Am I planning on selling in the next 1, 2, 3, 5 years? If you're not, why try to project and guess and, stock pick of what exactly is going to happen to your house value in the next couple of years? How is it going to serve you, or how is it going to serve you as an investment vehicle over the next 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, 100%. And I do agree the affordability it's crazy and difficult. And it's actually one thing as a developer, builder, and investor, what we look at, and we're trying to say, okay, hey, we 100% agree. So one thing we do is we go into what we call the secondary markets because land is cheaper there and you're going to see people commute a little bit more. But we also think about from a product design side, we're now putting out what would be brand new builds with either multi-generational options. So now instead of you being a millennial and you have to buy this house yourself, well, maybe you're in a situation where we're creating these houses, and this isn't our idea, but we're designing these houses that either give you an opportunity to have multi-generational or even an ADU that's already built in an accessory dwelling unit so that you could buy as a primary and offset some of those monthly costs by providing rental housing. And so I think there's a lot of, if you can get creative and put a lens of opportunity on those things, it's really hard to get that affordability thing tackled. So it's almost like you have to do it in creative ways so that you can spread that big challenge, because I don't actually know how you solve that affordability problem.
It's more of everything. It is more single family, but it is also thinking creatively, like you're talking about. When someone has the ability to generate $500 or $700 a month from generating, renting the apartment above the garage helps them offset. But then the builders are responding. They're trying to lower the barrier to entry by also just building smaller. So over the last 3 years, average housing starts have gone from like 2,700 square feet down to 2,400. So that's about 10%, smaller homes. Building smaller homes doesn't necessarily solve the housing crisis, but they're coming at it from a variety of angles. And then a lot of jurisdictions like Bend are encouraging all product types, all the way up and down the product ladder, from condos to townhomes to multifamily, all different types of variations so that people have different entry points. And because everyone's going to use real estate in a different manner. And it's not always going to be, hey, my first step in is in a single family house on a 10,000 square foot lot. I think that model is always going to be part of our housing market, but I think it's going to become a smaller and smaller piece of it.
Yeah. And I tip my hat as well to them adjusting that, seeing what's happening and saying, hey, how do we deal with this affordability challenge? And they're doing a good job, as best of a job as they can. It's so easy to point fingers and be like, but they're trying to create the middle housing. They're trying to create these opportunities so that, now you have your house that's on it's a single family house, and now they introduced middle housing so that you can partition it off and actually sell it. So there are these options and these ways to try to create more affordability, where before the zoning, literally just the zoning and code didn't allow for it.
Yeah.
They're making adjustments there, which I think is a smart move.
No, it's happening. And for anyone that, like, if we're talking Bend, Oregon specifically, anyone that says, oh, the city has no idea what they're doing and they're ruining the town, haven't put in the time to really understand the amount of forethought and planning that's going into what's happening here. It's absolutely mind-boggling. And likewise, the developers and builders that are coming up with these communities, it's awesome, forward-looking things. And they deserve nothing but, praise for the efforts that they're putting in to give us a built product future that's going to withstand all different types of things, from transportation needs and walkability and bikeability, and creating whole communities, these nodes within the community, so that you can have 80% of your life within a very close area of retail and shopping and dining and work and all these other things, to create less cross traffic through towns and more connectivity, recreationally, et cetera. And I'm just very humbled by what's happening here. Yeah. And nationwide, we're seeing a lot of planning changes that are very refreshing. Dating back to the 1950s, after World War II, the government wanted to promote housing for all. The GI Bill, they were sending everyone to college and they wanted to get everyone a house. And the government really did the spending of these, interstate system. And they put in a lot of the infrastructure to kind of subsidize housing. And it gave us this spread out single family design that causes a lot of traffic, a lot of time of people in their cars, and a low productivity of the land, because it was these large lots spread out. And so where we're coming and maturing as a nation and as municipalities today, it's going to be a really interesting, cool future in real estate.
Yeah. What on the future of real estate, how do you think AI is going to come into this game? And talk to us a little bit about that future of real estate mixed with technology. What's going to go on?
I don't know. I think I've got a few too many gray hairs now to speak to what AI is going to do to housing. Yeah. But it's exciting. I love change. Anytime there's a change, I don't think it's going to, I think the built product of housing is not going to change with that. But what I think it's going to do is remove friction and unnecessary, delays in all the services and sales around it. Yeah. I think it's just going to make things more efficient, and anyone in the industry that's kind of a middleman service, or where they stand between two items or people of value. I think that their roles are going to change dramatically. And those people in the middle can either use AI, like in real estate sales, to become the best in the industry. But I think anyone that's kind of a haphazard purveyor that's not committed to being at the absolute leading edge using these tools, they're going to be left behind.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It was explained really well in a podcast I listened to. It's not going to replace all these jobs. It's going to co-pilot with them, right? So let's say
it's going to co-pilot for the people that are ready, and for everyone else, they're not going to know what happened to them.
And which is 100% true. Yep. So I think it is really important to pay attention to that, right? And the co-piloting component is what's so good about that is if you can, let's say you have a tedious job or something that takes a lot of time, like the title process, or doing these different things, both blockchain plus AI together. Once it starts to really get put in use, the way that those systems learn and how they speed things up, if you can co-pilot those positions properly, one, it might lower overhead, but two, it's going to speed things up. And time truly is money, especially in real estate. It's a lot of money. I mean, you can see one of the frustrating things that would happen to me would be, we have this housing crisis. We want to put a building permit together, and how long it would take to get those building permits, especially on larger multifamily projects. You had if you look at some of the stuff that happened, especially as interest rates started to rise, there's these projects that are in a 200 unit project that's in for permits. It takes 12 months to get a site plan approval. And all of a sudden the interest rate picture has completely changed. And that's really hard. And so it's easy to look at that and point fingers. And I started to have to put a different perspective on, because when you start to think about how challenging it is to create systems to actually manage these places, I started pulling back a little bit and saying, wow, like it is an extremely difficult thing to do. And it's so easy to point fingers and get frustrated, but it's so difficult to come up with solutions. And they are coming up with solutions. I'll give a shout out. Actually, one of my pain points is the permits. I got into Chutes County. I got a permit. It used to take 4, 6, or 8 weeks. Yeah. I got one in 3 days. So they are trying to solve
That's
it.
amazing.
And it's pretty amazing.
Well, they're doing a good job there. But yeah, so to speak of AI, like, I think that, when I go to a closing table and I see a stack of paper, yay deep, and the inefficiencies involved with transferring a property from one person to the next, and the amount of redundant research on easements and all these other things to pass a property from one to the other, I'm like, this is going to radically change. And I think there's always going to be a role for, we're not selling stocks or blockchain or ETFs or whatever. There's going to need to be a wise local hand to understand septic fields and easements and the physical nature of real estate. But I think any sort of inefficiency is going to be absolutely wiped out. And I think we're going to make smarter decisions. Like I was doing a presentation on housing in Bend the other day, and I wanted to dive deep into the data. And so I grabbed all these data sets of months of inventory compared to housing prices and trends. And I did this overlay graphs with Chat GPT, and it spat out some graphs, and I was able to clearly see what were the inflection points when housing prices started to go down over the last 3-4 decades in Bend, at what months of inventory. And everyone's freaking out because we're up 25% in inventory year over year. But we went from 2.7 months to 3 point whatever months. And when I was studying the data, housing prices really only started to cave over flat or down when we got to 10 or more months of inventory. So we would really, like when I'm able to use this data to reflect and start talking, instead of talking about 3 or 4 different points, I'm now able to combine them all and get some high level computing on it, where I'm like, okay, how they all come together is this, which we're going to need a 3x in today's inventory to get a downward trajectory on prices. And so I don't care if it goes from 2.7 to 3.2 months of inventory, but the headlines in the paper say housing inventory is up by 1/3, and people are like, well, it's flooding the market. And I'm like, well, no, we're half of a balanced market, and we're 4x away from an oversupplied market.
Exactly. So what Brian's saying there is he used ChatGPT, he co-piloted, and instead of this fear-mongering news article, it's, hey, no, we're actually at just over 3 months of supply. Normal market is 6 months of supply, and housing, like real issues with pricing, is at 10 months of supply. So you use data and co-piloting to quickly, what would have probably taken you, if you had to have your team go and build that graph, it would have been like half a day thing. You got it done in
It was 8 minutes before my presentation. It was awesome. And that's where I start having fun. And I think that people can utilize the technology that way. And we're just tip of the iceberg on what we can do with AI. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, don't get left behind. Go and co-pilot.
No, if you don't understand how to implement AI in your industry, you're already behind. You better get running.
You better get running. Okay, so we touched on culture. We touched on the success component. Let's touch on marketing. The marketing component of business, real estate, yourself, personal branding for your business. Talk to us a little bit of that, because I think you guys are on the cutting edge of a lot of things, but marketing, I would say, is one of the top ones.
And I'm looking down at my phone, not to ignore you, is because I was pulling up something today where I was thinking about branding in our team and marketing. And I recently had the opportunity to speak to about 1,000 agents in Orlando on branding and marketing and what it means to be relevant in your market long term. And really what I came up with is that marketing has to be built around something very solid. It has to be built around who you are as a person and the values that you breathe into and present to the market day in and day out, year in and year out, decade in and decade out. And I think there's a lot of marketing that is not necessarily marketing. It's more advertising. It's to try to get transactions. But it comes at the cost of building a brand that stands the test of time. And I had the 3 R's of it, and it was, as you put out marketing or advertising, make sure that one, that it resonates with your final target market. So you don't do something for attention that won't resonate with who you're trying to speak with. Number two, that it builds your reputation. So you can also do something that can get you attention in business, but it might come at the cost of reputation. So it has to resonate with your target market. It has to build your reputation. And number three, does it build respect for you? So make sure that all the marketing you're putting out there will help you build respect, and so that your clients know and appreciate and trust you, that it builds your reputation and that resonates with your client. And so, we do that through in a lot of ways. And what I was just looking at right now is, one of the things that we do is a podcast called Ben Beat, and it's really talking with all the community leaders and people that are involved in really anything related to housing, all the way from homelessness to food insecurity to long-term planning management to city council, et cetera. But I was looking at the values of the titles, the descriptions and the titles of the podcast that we're doing, and it's growth and impact, crafting affordable living for all, standing at the crossroads of growth, diversity, equity, and inclusion, building trust and making voices heard, value-driven vision for Ben's growing communities, building a city for the future, entrepreneurs of impact. And all those words start to come into this, this big word map of like who you are. And I believe that marketing is not so much a gimmick. It's about putting your values on display and living those in the market. And that's durable. What's not durable is cute logos and specific strategies at trying to grab specific market, because there's always going to be somebody else out there with a new tactic, a new way of getting in touch with clients, and et cetera, et cetera. But when you can create marketing that is built upon an ethos, like what we were just talking about, that's something that lasts, that you're able to then build your profession on and serve your clients at a high level, where you can have stability, so you can take the deep breath and not always having to be panicking, about creating the basic revenue or connections with your clients.
Yeah. I really like that definition of marketing, right? And it's interesting because it all ties together. The marketing and how you market is at the same core of where your culture comes from. Yeah. And then the success, all of that together comes, and long-term, being committed to those things over the long term is what drives the success. And that's what drives a SEAL team to be able to be 9 agents and do, just as much sales as somebody that with 150 agents.
Well, we have a lot of fun, and it's fun getting to the point of your career where you can show up and lead with values like that, and it stops feeling like work. Yeah. In your 20s, when you're just panicking and trying to figure out how you're going to create enough income to build the house so that you can raise your family, your head's in a different headspace than it is where I am now. But I think the sooner that people can get to understanding that if you build a career that doesn't have an ethos and values underpinning it, you're building it on quicksand. And so, like, if you can commit to these values early on, your career is going to be more stable. It's going to have higher growth, and it's going to be durable for a longer time. And so I think the sooner that you can realize that it's not about any specific title or any specific gain, it's more about showing up and being the person you want to be in whatever industry you're working in. That's probably the biggest key to success long term.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Let's pivot a little bit to the family side of things. I know that when my wife and I first got married and started to think about what we wanted our family to be like, the culture within our family, how we wanted to raise our kids, one of the first people that came up was we want to raise them like the lads do, because we got to spend time with you guys. We got to spend time with your kids. And it was something that had a huge impact to me as a new father. Talk to me a little bit about your family, the culture you've built there, and then just unfold that a little bit.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. It's always a fight to raise a family exactly how you want to. There's always going to be challenges. There's always going to be sacrifices that you make. You're not going to be the dad or the mother you want to be at all times. Mm-hmm. You're going to be distracted when you don't want to be. You're going to be tired when someone wants to play Battleship or play Pretty Ponies. And it's hard to be the perfect dad. And I'm far from that. Luckily, I married an incredible woman like you did. We both absolutely lucked out and found amazing life partners. And that's the key of a lot of this. But knowing why you're doing things, and then carving out, a value system and a headspace for them, and understanding that they're a very valuable part of the equation. They're the most valuable part of the equation. And you draw sacred boundaries around that. Your kid doesn't care about the war that you fought all day, nor should they. And if you bring it back and put it on them and saying, I'm doing my best, I've had a hard, like you're putting your personal struggles and journey onto the back of a 6-year-old, it's just unfair. And so I think you draw really clean, distinct lines around that. And there was a story I told you once where when I was wanting to build the lad group here in Bend, I called a guy who had a similar team in the town that I grew up in, Evergreen, Colorado. His name was Tupper Briggs. My father was the respected home builder in that town, and he was respected by all. But when I looked to sales, I called this guy Tupper, and we didn't really work with him. But he ran a SEAL team size model, really well respected, community oriented. And I called him and I said, hey, I wanted to get this lad group thing going, but I'm working 20 hours a day. I'm doing all these things. And I just laid out for 10 minutes all the things that I wanted to do and be in the community over the coming decades. And at the end of it, he said, Brian, if you do half of what you're saying you're going to do, the only thing you're going to have an issue with is you're going to look back and say, I didn't spend enough time with my family and kids. And he was absolutely right. And what was interesting and a funny full circle on this is I was down in LA about to present to about 1,000 Sotheby's real estate agents on how to build brand and be successful over the long term. And as I was sitting in the green room right before I went on to stage, Tupper Briggs called me and I picked up the phone and he said, hey, I haven't talked to you in a while. I have a family place that we need to sell in Oregon. But here's the guy who said, hey, the biggest regret you're going to have is not doing enough with your family. And then here I was about to go on stage trying to teach those same lessons to other people. And he was 100% absolutely right. It wasn't a matter of you're going to be successful or not. If you show up with dedication and clarity and focus, over the long term, you'll be successful. There's going to be iterations and chapters of our lives where we all have our struggles. But you're going to get there. It's going to be when you're on the backside of all this, looking back, did you show up as the dad that you want to be? And that's all that's important. And so as I get older, I'm more and more attuned to this, and I'm a better and better dad day by day. And now it's changing. I've got one kid off in a college and my daughter's in high school, and then I've got an 8-year-old at home. So I'm all the way from Battleship to talking to the dean of my son's college because he's missing classes. He's a beautiful son. Yeah. I love him. But I'm in all these worlds, and now that I have a little bit more maturity, but we have done a lot of great things together. And I would just, to kind of put a bow on this, draw sacred lines around your family and don't allow people to cross that. And I've told my team, I was like, nobody gets my head and heart space anymore at a T-ball game. Yeah. We all have our own barriers of accessibility and things like that, but you've got to have your sacred times. And if your phone is in your pocket, and even if you're not picking it up, if you glance at it or you're fidgeting with it, or you're taking that one call and walking out of the room when you're in a board game with your kids, you've absolutely set the standard that whatever it is more important than they are. And so you draw sacred lines around that and do not cross, and do not rent your head or your heart space in family time to your clients. Yeah. There's no price of admission high enough for me to give that space up anymore.
Yeah. And that's what I love about you. I think that distraction on that point, I think that distraction is one of the biggest problems we could have, because there's so many things coming at us, the bing, the bong, the ding, and that distraction that I fall for myself is something that I have to really remind myself on and work on a daily basis, right? It's that drawing that line and then staying committed and disciplined to it is so important. And it's something that I'm not perfect at by any means, but it's something that I strive to be and do. And it's because of men like you.
But when you can show up, like, I know you're an absolute A++, highly driven person. And if I were to call you and I get a message back saying I'm with my family for the next 4 hours, I'll get back to you. That's nothing. I'll give you nothing but respect, because I know that in the operating hours where we're working professionally and you're building and I'm selling, that we're both running 90 miles an hour. We're clear. We're focused. We're on the ball. We've done our homework and we can operate at a super high level together. And when you've drawn your family time, nothing but kudos and respect for you. Yeah. And I've found that people that don't respect your boundaries are people that you don't want to work with anyways. And if you always have boundaries and you're only accessible an hour a day and you're not a professional, you haven't earned the right to build those boundaries. But if you show up and work hard and become a leading professional in whatever industry you have, everyone's going to respect. And, it's almost like when you set those boundaries, they're like, oh, you're at your kid's hockey game or whatever. awesome.
Yeah.
Good for you. Don't call me back
Yeah.
for a couple of days. And you actually resonate more when you put those values on displays for your client.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
On that note, what's your definition of a wealthy man? What's your definition of wealth?
Well, to me, money has never been wealth. Money has always represented the potential for security.
Yeah.
Wealth, I think, is a different term. I think wealth is to the point where you've settled into the head and heart space that you were meant to live in. You have worked hard enough to create the financial security so that you can take that deep breath and be present in whatever life fits you. For me, it's not going to be about staying at 5-star resorts around the world with second homes in Mexico. I think wealth has very little to do with that. And the people that I meet with financial wealth get very little emotional rewards from those type of assets anyway. But for me to have built a life that I'm proud of, that I can take a deep breath in and settle into, that's wealth to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it has very little to do with the bank account. While I said that there's a certain level of financial success that allows you to take a little extra deep breath, but it's not an exponential up and to the right return for me. It's about getting to the point where I have the security to enjoy my time and heart space and recreational activities with those that I love.
I love it. What's next for Brian Ladd?
It depends. It depends on when you ask. I'm enjoying mentoring people.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying looking past this chapter of real estate. I still want to be a very relevant and important part of real estate sales here and the careers of my agents here in Bend, Oregon, and getting a chance to work with people like you and your family is I'm grateful for, and I want to continue to do that. But where I'm looking kind of past that, like, how can I help the community in a bigger way? How can I add my knowledge of what housing is and how it affects everyone, from the new to town Californians all the way down to the people that are experiencing houselessness because of the barriers to entry we have in housing. I feel that I can be an informed part of that conversation, and then on a bigger macro scale, to get back to those things that I perhaps pushed aside a little bit in my 20s. I'm enjoying rock climbing. I'm enjoying, flying that little plane with you and your dad. I'm enjoying playing in the mountains. Next week, I'm going to be up on Mount Baker, trying to earn my mountain guide certification. And I'm going to be with a bunch of 25-year-olds that are guiding all around the world. And here comes old man Brian. And so I'm just trying to get back to the things that kind of stoke my fire. And so that I can, continue to have that kindling and those logs burning for the next 20, 30 years so that I don't burn out and lose that sparkle in my eye and passion for living.
I love it. One of the things I think is plaguing the youth of today is the ability to take massive action. You have all this stuff coming at you. And there's a saying, right? Knowledge isn't power. It's only potential power. It's the massive action behind that really creates change. For somebody that's listening to this, they hear all this knowledge base, but now we need to create a plan for massive action for them. What are some of the steps you would say, some massive action steps that you would say that somebody young could take to really push things forward in their life, their investing? What are some massive actions that you would give somebody?
So I have to be on stage in about 10 minutes.
Okay, we'll go. We gotta
but no, so we'll put a pause on that.
Going hard, yeah.
Yeah.
How about we just pause that? You want to just cut it?
So just pause that. Okay. But let me see if I can put a bow on this. And if it doesn't work, we'll finish it. I think massive action is going to be small action. Yeah. Take the first step, make the first investment, even if it's a $500 investment in a fund rise or, a roof stock or something to get your toes in the water with real estate, to start developing that memory, that muscle memory of learning how to invest and becoming knowledgeable. I think it's start investing, even if it's low, and continue to gain knowledge. And it's not an all-in move. I think it's putting your toe in the water. Trying to get your first rental property is an absolute game changer. They say in stock market investing, it's once you get to your first 100, it becomes exponential. I think likewise, I think you get your first rental property, your life changes. So I would say start there.
Couldn't agree more. Could not agree more. Step by step, starting with the baby one. Well, Brian, for anyone that wants to get connected with you, stay following you, where can they find you?
Bend, Oregon, Bend Property Source, Lad Group, you'll find us.
Yeah, we'll link to that in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on. We're definitely going to have you back on. Thank you for being such a great mentor in my life, but also beyond that, a leader in our community and sharing all the knowledge that you've gained over time. I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you for having this conversation. I appreciate you for putting me in this position of mentorship. It makes me reflect on how I can interact and give back. And it's people like you that are keeping me excited about the market. So
boom, baby.
Thanks,
boom.
Dirk.
Thank you. And with that, we will see you on the next one, baby.